Howdy, folks, and welcome to the podcast Iron. My name is Laura Mullen Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. I am thrilled to tell you that our guest on today's show is Gabrielle Egnater. Gabby and I worked together on the steering committee for the 2019 National Conference, and I am extremely honored to have her as a friend and colleague. At this moment, she is currently finishing up her final year as a graduate student in sculpture at Alfred University. Gabby, thank you so much for making time in your schedule for this interview. I know that your workload as an MFA candidate is intense, but it sounds like you are exactly in the right headspace to handle everything. I have really enjoyed learning how you navigated the waters of cast iron art up until this point, and hearing you recount firsthand your experience at this year's Berlin International Conference has helped me glean a little inside perspective to what I missed since I was not able to attend. The podcast Iron Show is sponsored in part by supporters on Patreon, so thank you to everyone who has joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of this show. And I am so honored to say that this episode is brought to you by our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, which is a national center for iron casting and metal art. For more information about Sloss Metal Arts and their programming, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com. And a few new things relating to Sloss Metal Arts have developed since we spoke last. First, they are having on-site events called bowl nights where you can design your own artistic bowl that will be poured in cast iron. To learn more about the dates and details of these events and all of the information, it's on their Sloss Metal Arts website event page. Also, Sloss Metal Arts hosts the National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices. And I get it, you already know that. But the steering committee for that conference is starting to ramp up the planning of this event. And so they have open calls for workshops, panels and presentations, demonstrations, guest furnaces, performances, and student cupola contest participants. The deadlines for all of these are October 31st. And please, if you have an idea or you want to share or promote at the conference, please do put your name in one of these hats. Community participation and sharing is what makes this event so special, but it's also one of the reasons why this event was created in the first place. So please apply for something. Whatever you have to say, we want to hear it or see it. And if you are a student, the Student Cupola Contest is for you. There is plenty of time for you to make a furnace, and if you are really interested in learning how to run a furnace and produce your own iron, there's no better way than building and running your own furnace. If you have questions about any of this, please reach out to me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com, and I'll try to get you in touch with the right person or steering committee member. But this conference is for you, and it's for us. So show us what you got. Okay, I know, that's enough. Let's get the show on the road. So without further ado, for all of you listening or watching, thanks so much for tuning in, and please enjoy. Gabrielle Egnater, welcome to the podcast Iron. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And so let's just start off, as is tradition. And I messed it up during the last episode. I actually had to be reminded by the guest. He said, "Don't you ask that question like, who the hell are you anyways?" And I was, oh my gosh. So I didn't mess it up this time. Well, Gabby, who the hell are you anyways?
It's a great question, but also a big question. But I guess I'll say that I'm an artist and an educator, and I'm currently an MFA candidate at Alfred University. So currently juggling all of my positions.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and it's also really stressful, but I'm glad that you're in the throes of it and getting a chance to do that at Alfred, which is a fantastic program. So I'm really excited to hear more about the insides of Alfred as we get further down in your interview. But let's talk about a little bit about formative years. Do you have any early childhood memories or any introductions to art or making or wood shop or anything that you feel like you could link to full circle maybe
in your life or your art now?
Yeah. So when I first saw the list of questions, I was trying to think of what a good formative moment was. I think if you asked my mother, she would say that I always loved fire. But I don't personally think that I was more in love with fire than anything else. I just think it was comforting. Who doesn't like to sit around a campfire? But I think something that really shaped my career was watching how my dad formed his career. So he is a concert producer and a lighting designer. So like a similarity between the world of like musicians and concerts and our world as artists is that there's no set path for your career and what that looks like. And I think that's always something that artists have to deal with is like, how are you going to make money? How is this going to be a career? How are you going to set up your time and your days? And seeing someone do that for themselves who was like a constant figure in my life and somebody who was traveling and with other creative people and making that a life and knowing that it was possible defined a lot of what I chose to do later on.
That's awesome because I think a lot of people that I know, but also people that I've interviewed, they kind of have the opposite end of that and that their parents weren't artists. So it's really awesome to hear that yours were supportive and that they were living that lifestyle themselves and so that they were role models for you. Did you have an interest in art like early childhood?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still friends with my art teacher from elementary school and from high school.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I have a really great relationship with them. But my high school was really special in the fact that I was in LA, and so there was a lot of parents who were in the movie industry who gave a lot of, financing to the art department of that high school. So we had like a ceramics room, a sculpture room, a photography room, a drawing room. So it was very much part of my high school experience. And I began to take, art making seriously when I did a summer program at Cal State, which is a university in Southern California. They have this, I don't even know what to call it. I think it's like a state subsidized summer program where high schoolers get to go into a university art setting for, I don't know, maybe it was a month or two and have like full studio days and really experience what it means to make art. And be with professors who taught at the university level. So after that experience, I think that was like the summer before 11th grade. That's when I really had solidified that art was what I was going to do with my life. And I also, at that point, I was doing sculpture, which I think is not as common in many people's stories. I like from talking to my friends and artists around me, it often seemed like a story of moving from painting or moving from ceramics. I was always in a three-dimensional space. I'm awful at drawing, truly awful.
I'm with you on in that same in that arena. I also like I can get a point across if I need to, but I don't draw for fun. I draw for necessity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I have to like convince my advisors of in grad school. I'm like, I'm trying to give you a sketch, but like sketching is not, the first thing that comes out of me when I have an idea. But so I did the Cal State program and I was applying to undergrads. And I ended up applying to quite a few places. And then at the end of the day, it was between Cooper Union and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And at the time, Cooper Union was going through issues with their endowment. And I wanted something that was more manageable for me financially and also moving around. I knew I wanted to do sculpture, so Chicago seemed more feasible than New York City to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up going to SAIC, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, for my undergrad, and I was there from 2014 to 2018.
Like, let me just jump in for a second and ask kind of like what your portfolio, because I'm kind of interested since you did have a kind of background in high school sculpture. What did your portfolio look like before you actually entered undergrad? Like materials or concepts or just, I'm just curious because it's kind of amazing that you went in with the intention of sculpture and had experience where in those sculptural formats in high school from that camp and other like awesome things that were afforded you in high school. So what did your portfolio look like when you applied?
Yeah, when I applied for undergrad, my portfolio was majority sculpture, but I felt like I had to do something 2D. So I like took like a month to like try and fill out part of a sketchbook. And I put that sketchbook as part of my portfolio as well. And I don't know if you ever experienced portfolio days. Did you ever do one of those?
I did, but it's funny because I was actually going to ask you about because Margie Levine and also Erin Cunningham, who I've interviewed for previous episodes, they both have really amazing stories about like the portfolio day.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about your
Yes,
portfolio day.
I vividly remember my portfolio day. Like I'm not the greatest at remembering things and having stories, but portfolio day, it's burned into my brain because it was like the most important thing to me when I was, that age.
Yeah.
So the portfolio day I went to was in San Diego, which was like 3 hours away from where I was born and raised.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down with my dad, and it was in this like I think like a convention center or a ballroom type of thing where I'm assuming similar format pre-COVID where there was just like kids everywhere holding their paintings and like talking with their parents and waiting in these lines.
Was this portfolio day for a lot of different, was it for many different schools or was it just for Chicago Institute of Art?
No, so there was like I would want to say like 20 to 30 schools being represented.
Okay.
So it was like convention center sized room.
Okay. So there's representatives from like lots of different, probably solely art departments though, or like art institutes or something. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're there with your dad, you got your portfolio. Did you bring any sculptures or was it photos of prints?
No, we printed out all of my documentation and like put it in a nice binder.
Nice.
And I think I brought my physical sketchbook with also some photos of the sketches. But I remember the first booth I went up to was Micah, the Maryland people, and I showed them my portfolio, and the guy looked through it and he said something along the lines of like, oh, I noticed like you don't use a lot of color in your work. It seems like very like tonal, black and white and some grays. And in my mind, I thought he was critiquing my work as in I thought he had hated it.
Oh, okay.
Because at that point, I had no idea that like that's how you start a conversation about art. You're like, oh, what are your color choices? What are you interested in? But at that point, I was like terrified. And then I ran away from the table and I was like, they hated it. And then after that one, I went to SAIC's booth. And I still remember I believe his name is Jason Dunda, was the one who looked at my portfolio. And SAIC does something where they accept people on the spot. So I showed them my portfolio and he was like, okay, the sculpture stuff is great. The sketches are awful. Don't show them to me again. But I'm going to accept you into the school. Yeah.
That's
So
great.
it was amazing. So I was accepted on the spot, but then had to do separate applications for financial assistance. Yeah, so that was like a very much defining moment in my head, but it's still burned in my head that I'm just awful at sketching.
I mean, I have to say that those two people didn't help the situation. Like they
No,
didn't help encourage your confidence,
no.
So but we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses,
Yeah.
and I actually, like, a lot of people that I interview will say that they're terrible at drawing, and it's like, well, I mean, there's a reason why not everybody that's an iron caster, like there are people that are iron casters that are also fantastic at drawing and painting and things like that. But there's also
Yeah.
a certain amount of us that it's like, there's a reason why we're working in like the 3D medium, and maybe we can make mock-ups, and there's different ways to sketch in three-dimensional, to get your idea across that's not on paper. So then you went as a freshman to
Yeah.
Chicago. So
Yeah.
what did that look like? Entering with already knowing that you were going to be in the sculpture concentration.
Freshman year at SAIC, I think the first year I wasn't anywhere near the metal shop or the foundry in the first semester. I think we had to take a core class that lasted all year. That was like our basic introduction, something called a research class. And I don't even know if I got to do any electives, but the way that I worked my way into metal was I needed a job. So I got the work study position in the wood shop and metal shop. So the way the work study positions functioned was you were on shift and you did like half your time in the wood shop or half your time in the metal shop, and depending who's on what, you gravitated towards one room or the other. And we like facilitated student projects and checked out tools for them. So during that first year, was seeing all the foundry students coming in and cleaning up their castings. So the way that the SAIC shop is set up is you walk in, you have your wood shop to your left, metal shop a little bit more back towards the right. Then you go through the back doors down a hallway to get to the foundry. So it was always this like hidden space from me when I was first trying to like make my way into that world. And I would just see the students coming out of the back room with these incredible castings. And then I would, be checking out tools for them to clean them and ask them questions about what they were making. And so then I decided I wanted to take the class. And I think it was probably first semester sophomore year that I decided to take the class. But it was very competitive. So I don't know. Do you know Gabe Akagawa?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was his class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was like, it was hard to get into, and I think it was mostly like seniors and juniors because they got to sign up for the classes first.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to sign up, I was on the wait list. And I ended up being on that wait list for probably like the first month of class until I was like officially enrolled, but I was like present for like the first, I don't know, 3 to 4 classes without being in the class. And then people like slowly dropped or decided they didn't want to be anywhere near fire. And so I like made my way up the wait list until I could get up into Gabe's class
and be like actually enrolled. But you were
Yeah.
that's so interesting to me That
Yeah.
they
So
like
I
keep
I
a
had to,
waiting list through the first couple of weeks so that as people fall away,
yeah.
then the people that really want to be there can kind of rise in and
Yeah. Yeah. So I had to fight to get into the
yeah.
foundry. Um, but it was definitely worth it. Um, I'm trying to think like when my first iron pour was. I don't remember the date. I want to say it was probably the end of my sophomore year. But it was at Grand Valley State. We went on a field trip. Um, and when I was preparing for this podcast, I was really trying to remember all the details, and I, for the life of me, cannot.
That's
But
okay.
I think it was in 2016 when I went to Grand Valley State. And so the, sorry, jumping back to the SAIC Foundry, when I was first going on a tour of the whole school, I remember the person giving the tour mentioned that like SAIC was like one of the few foundries left in a city space. And so there are a lot of, limits on that because you have the foundry, then you have a tiny courtyard next to it, and then you have the Art Institute of Chicago. So you have this like wonderful, fiery, explosive space, I don't know, 30 feet away from the back of millions of dollars of prized art. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of limits
Mhm.
to what you can do in that space.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of connections and trips and travel to get to Iron. But
Mhm.
since I left, I think Dan made like a smaller cupola that they run sometimes, like in front of the school, away from the actual museum.
Mhm. Mhm.
But so for my first pour, we had to go to like have a formal field trip to go to Grand Valley State, which was probably like, I don't know, a 3-4 hour drive
Uh-huh.
to go
I
to the
don't
Iron Pour.
even I don't even know where Grand Valley State is. So,
It's in Michigan.
oh, okay.
So we were going from Chicago to like the western side of Michigan. And I don't think we actually brought any molds.
Mhm.
I think we just went to experience it for the first time
Yeah.
because I don't even think we had that much of a breakdown. I remember being very like unsure of the whole process when I got there. I didn't even understand like the full functioning of how a cupola worked. Because at that time I'd only had experience with aluminum and bronze, and it seemed like at that time it seemed like the coolest positions were like the live end and the dead end because you were getting next to the metal. And I don't know who it was, but somebody placed me on charge crew, and they were like, yeah, you're going to be around the furnace for the pour. And it was like me and like one or two other students on the furnace, and I was like, oh great, I don't get to be near the metal because I didn't understand what like being like on the charge crew meant. And I was like, oh, I don't get to pour the metal. And they were like, no, it's fine, you'll love it, just trust me. And so I ended up, falling in love with furnaces after the first time, charging a cupola because I mean, I don't know how you feel, but for me, I love being near the cupola and the metal cooking and seeing the whole process through that lens.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I mean, when I first got introduced to it, and I kind of wonder, I should like take it a consensus, but I think that sometimes for people's first iron pours, they get assigned to the tower because, like, I don't want to say that the tower is like a safer area because you still can get this, you can still get really hurt, really burned because it's really hot and
Yeah.
there's like fumes and stuff. But I also, they were like, oh, just go up on the tower with that other sculpture grad. She'll show you what to do. And, um, yeah, there's something about being the person that is feeding the furnace that is, you know, if you didn't put the metal into the furnace, then it wouldn't be able, like nothing else would be able to happen like that. I feel like, you know, the person that's running the furnace, like, uh, you know, watching the slagger and tapping it and stuff, like, I guess that is the most important person because they kind of have their head in all levels of the game telling you what to do on the tower or whatever. But really, if nobody's willing to feed the furnace, there's no pour. Like, that's
Yeah.
it. And I think the first couple of years, that's all I did. I was just like on the tower crew, and I loved it because you have, especially where I went to grad school, the tower was really tall. And so you could like look out on, it was kind of like being on a higher level of well, not like a skyscraper, but you just got to like look out and have a different vantage point, and like you could see a different perspective, like almost like the bird's eye view of everything that's going on. And, you know, you get to see the metal as it's going into the ladle when you're up there. And I fell in love with it so much that I think it kind of stunted my education in a way that I didn't know how to read the furnace because I spent so much time like behind it and up on the tower, you know. And
Interesting.
so it wasn't until I went to another pour where the furnace failed. And that's when I realized, because I couldn't help because I had only ever run on tower. And so
Yeah.
I had no, like, nothing to offer for like advice or like anything, or like because no, it just basically was like a bad situation. Like nobody knew how to fix it. And so we just had to drop bottom and
Oh,
start again. And I was like, no, I want to know how to do this. And that's when I went back and was like, I'm done being on the tower for a little while. I still love it, but I have to learn like how to read the furnace, how to know when it's hot enough to go on blast from burning in. I need to know, like, you know, when do you need to know to add more Coke because the bed has burned down, you know, like those things. And so anyways, yeah, I love it. And I think when the point where you're watching the slagger and all the slag is coming out, but you're waiting to see the metal start to come
yeah.
out, that's like so excited. Like the best, that's like better than, almost like better than like watching the furnace be tapped for me,
Oh,
because
yeah.
just like you have to, I remember not having that eye. Like I remember watching the slagger with my professor, and then he'd be like, you got metal, bought it. And I'd be like, how does he know? Like, how did he know that? You know, there, it's like you have to get trained, or like you have to know what to look for to know, like, okay, metal's up, bought it, time to get the crew and tap it. But yeah, I love it. So, well, then what happened next?
Um, let's see. Yeah. So I was on charge crew, and then after that, I think I just like jumped on every single field trip for iron that we had. I think after that it was Crabtree Farms, which is one of the places that SAIC usually goes to for off-campus pours. I don't know if they still go there anymore, but we did like a few pours over there, and it was a couple hours west. And it's like this gorgeous space. I don't even know, I wouldn't even call it like a farm. It was like, it looked like one of those like home and gardens landscape.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe it. It was, the grass was always insanely green. There was like foliage and plants that were always like perfectly manicured. So it was always very interesting to have a bunch of iron kids come into that space of this like perfect like magazine looking farm and ranch space to do our pours. But we got to camp there overnight, and it was on the side of a barn to be able to set up our iron. And that's when I think I got more access to learning about the furnace. So I learned a lot about furnaces from Dan Matheson. who's the manager at SAIC. I owe him a lot for how much I learned from him and shadowing him, and the way that he just like threw me in, because I was definitely hesitant about jumping into iron when I was in undergrad. So Dan was very much like, nope, just go do it. Like, don't think about it, just go do it. And so he always gave me the little push I needed to jump into the fire. And then, after a couple months of jumping in, I was like, oh yeah, I really do love this. So I feel like a couple pours at Crabtree Farms, and then I went to Sloss as part of another field trip. And at that point, I had moved from taking Gabe's class to being a teaching assistant for Gabe's class. And I was also turning 21 while we were in Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah.
Okay.
So my first Sloss experience was on my 21st birthday.
Wow.
Which is
That's great.
amazing. Yeah. So my birthday is April 8th, and I'm sad I'm not going to be able to go to Sloss this year because it's going to fall on my birthday again. And so I just love the fact that, every other year I'll probably be able to be at Sloss celebrating my birthday. But at Sloss, Dan and the SAIC folks, we ran a furnace while we were there.
So this was for one of the national conferences?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was, first time going to the National Contemporary Cast Iron Art Conference.
So you ran a furnace.
Yes. So we, Dan and the students, we ran a furnace while we were there. And I think it wasn't like a performance pour. We didn't do any reaction molds. It was just one of the production pours that was lined up in the shed. And at that point, I had helped Dan a few times. So it was me, Dan, and Gwen setting up the furnace, putting in the bottom sand, putting in the bed coke. And it was part of my time of learning how that all functioned.
Is it Gwen Chu?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to
make
sure, because there's a couple Gwens. So
I am also friends with multiple Gwens.
Yeah. Was that kind of the iron kiss of death, like that you were gonna stay in iron? Because for me, Sloss wasn't the reason why I am still in the community, but I think a lot of people, when they go to the national conference, that's when they're like, oh, okay, I'm in it now. Like, I'm in it come hell or high water, sort of a thing. So what did you think going to Sloss and seeing not just because you kind of talked about the field trips and stuff, but I feel like going to the national conference and seeing a vast majority of the community, like, how did that, because then later I think we served on the steering committee together.
Yeah.
So you obviously liked it enough to want to give back and be a committee member and volunteer. So what were your like kind of big takeaways from that first visit?
Prior to my first national conference, I was like fully dedicated to foundry in terms of aluminum and bronze, and I was definitely interested in iron. But I think, when you're a student just going on field trips and having your teacher guide you in these things, you don't realize like what you're a part of. And I think that's what the national conference does so well. Or whenever, you step outside of a strictly institutional pour, you really realize like the depth of this community and what it is. So I think at Sloss it is when I realized the community and was, I would describe it as my whatever kiss of death.
What did as I was saying that, I was like, what a weird thing that I'm about to say.
I don't know. I don't know how else to put it. I think you're like, yeah, this is something amazing and special, and I want it in my life forever. And I felt that way, I think on my first aluminum pour. And I think it just like from that first aluminum pour to first sloss just became more and more solidified of like, this is a beautiful art form and a beautiful community, and something about it just makes you feel good, and you just want it in your life in one capacity or another. Yeah, and so after Sloss, I I don't know if Sloss was the moment exactly I decided, but somewhere in my junior and senior year, I wanted to continue casting after undergrad. So I decided to make a little gas furnace. So it wasn't for iron, but I was dedicated to casting something. So I made a little gas furnace that was capable of doing aluminum and bronze because I was so dedicated to sculpture and realized that everything depended on facilities.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I need to start collecting tools. I need to start building a furnace so I can do the things I love when I'm out of this space. So Dan helped guide me through making my first little gas furnace that I still have.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like that just kind of is making a little furnace, even though it's not related to iron, like even though it's not doesn't have the capabilities of like melting iron, but it's just shows that you are really in it to keep casting, and you're manifesting your future by like putting those stakes out there and saying like, no, this is what I'm gonna need when I graduate, because in a way you're kind of like creating, like willing it into fruition by making sure that you have access to it. So then when you were in, let's see, so when you were in undergrad, did you go back to Sloss a second time as an upperclassman, or it just fell that one time?
I feel like it must have been my junior year when I went to Sloss.
And it's every other year, so that would have been.
Yeah, because the next one I was on the
steering committee. Yeah.
So I ended up getting on the steering committee. I don't know how. I feel like it wasn't a fluke, but somebody dropped out and I filled in is how I got onto it, because it wasn't I jumped in late to the steering committee. And so I ended up helping out with the molds crew.
Yeah.
And then after that, the mold crew sort of got disbanded. And I was like, well, I only got to experience, I don't know, like 6 to 9 months of really trying to understand what the steering committee is. And so then I signed up again for workshops. So Gabby Dinger and I ran workshops.
That was in 2019?
The first one I was part of was 2019, and then the workshops was 2021.
Oh, okay. So the online.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the online one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
think that everybody just did the best they could.
Yeah. It was a very like strange circumstance. COVID changed everything. I think everyone can agree to that. And I think everyone was in like a really hard headspace at the time. But we ended up doing something, which was amazing. And the fact that we got to have a semblance of a conference is better than no conference. And I really did meet a lot of people at that conference, and I didn't realize it until I went to Berlin. So I just came back from the international conference in Berlin like a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I met so many people for the first time. And it was such a strange experience because I had only worked with everyone virtually.
Yeah.
So there were so many people that I like spoke with like once a month or multiple times a month. That was all via video. And then I meet them for the first time and it's not even at Sloss. It's in Berlin in
It's
Germany. Yeah. And I'm like,
overseas.
I'm really glad to meet you, but this is like the strangest
Yeah.
space and time to meet you because so much has happened for me between then and now, and I'm sure for everyone else.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I met like Julie Ward in person for the first time. I met Alexandra, who is now at Sloss, in person for the first time. And there are still people who I haven't met in person that I worked with closely
Mm-hmm.
for that conference that I'm looking forward to meeting. But yeah, it's really strange, but also comforting now that I'm able to like start being full circle with some of these things.
Yeah. And I always think that it's really amazing that you and the rest of the steering committee that year like went through with that. You still made it happen. And I do remember, that it was still pretty dark in the pandemic at that time. And
Yes,
so
very
to be
dark.
able to say, the conference isn't canceled, we're just going to pivot and we're going to do it the best that we can remotely. It's like, well, how do you do iron remotely? Like you can't, but the like sharing of knowledge, the sharing of examples, the connections, in
Yeah.
a way that like you're talking about your personal experience now, so that you already had some sort of relationships with these people, and now meeting them in person, you're just like building the next level.
Yeah.
But it's like the networking in the cast iron art community was not dead during the
Yeah.
pandemic. It was still making it, making connections and getting information out there that otherwise, there is kind of like an unfortunate aspect to, if you miss a conference, you miss a lot of information or
Yeah.
networking or inspiration and stuff, and we can't all go to everything. And so I'm kind of hoping that uh maybe some of the positive aspects of the remoteness could be added. It's like I couldn't go to the international conference this year, so I'm really excited to get to the part where you tell me about where you just were,
Yeah.
because it's like I couldn't go to Germany, but like if I could have listened in to like the keynote speaker or something, like what are the
Yeah.
aspects that we could start adding to the in-person conferences to spread some of the like connectivity to people that are at home. And so it's interesting. So I'm going to the Western Conference next. Well, like I already told you at the beginning before we started recording, when your episode is live, I will be at the Western Conference like that Friday night, I think is like the performances or whatever I saw on the schedule. But I saw something about, for those of you that will see in person, well, we look forward to seeing those of you that are in person, and it was something about even those remote. And so I'm curious to know what is going to be like, if people are just going to be on panels zooming in to be on the panel, or if they're going to be broadcast. It's just like,
Yeah.
I think that that's one thing that I mean, I think also it's too soon. Right now we're all still like have too much Zoom fatigue to think about, adding it in. Like we're just getting back to learning how to be in person. Okay. But it's like, once we get back into the swing of in person, what could we add from the time that we learned during the pandemic? And like that's something that I think I'm talking too much about, but it's something that I'm talking about it because I think it's important to me. Like that, I feel like that might be something that, like that might be my flag to fly, is like
Yeah.
to try and see what could be possible. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has made everyone have very strong feelings about Zoom. And I
Mhm.
think there are positives and negatives to it. And I also think our community is not always the first to embrace technology. I mean, we are sculptors in general, especially iron casting. Like I with the technology that we use for actual iron casting, it has not progressed much at all in the past 100 years, even
Mhm.
more so in certain aspects. So our art does not immediately call for technology. And I
Yeah.
think, yes, it can benefit it. And yes, there are some people doing some cool things
Oh
with
yeah.
the technological aspect, but it's like not really inherent
Yeah.
to what we do. And so I think trying to make them go together seamlessly has been like a bit of like a tension and a bit of a struggle. But I think with the national conference, we were able to do something
Yeah.
with it. And I think now we need to find a way to sort of keep it in
Mhm.
our space, so we don't lose this access and public recording that we've started building on.
Yeah. So I'm interested to see how things settle, but then also how they move forward. Cause you're right. Like, I think that it's like some of us are a group of Luddites and proud, like,
Yeah.
and that was like one of the things that in the last episode, talking with David Jones about how, we both had the same professor, but at different times in
Oh,
years apart. But I do remember like that same, like, I don't check my email, it's just like, and we have to also remember that like not everybody's in the same generation. So different people will struggle or embrace different things, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out and how we can move forward and grow with what
yeah.
we've learned. And maybe also say, you know what, maybe it doesn't have to be a live broadcast, but maybe just recording it so that late, like, and that's, it taps into things that are important to me. This whole like capturing, like, I just feel like there's so many stories of pours or like stories of furnaces and things happened. And I'm like, well, where are the pictures? Like, who was like
Yeah.
videotaping with the tape decks? Like, why was nobody? And it's like, well, because they had no money. That's why they were casting in iron, but also like it was all hands on deck. There wasn't and so it's like I'm, you know, trying to, I don't know, put my mark on it or whatever you would
Yeah.
say.
I mean, I think it's really exciting to see these different types of like recording and storytelling that is coming out of iron, because I think it was for so long like that apprenticeship format of you
Yeah.
studied under this person, so you got their information and so on without like a general public pool
Mm-hmm,
of
mm-hmm.
information. And I know like there's like the Warmest Regards book,
Yeah.
there's your podcast, and now we're like finally pulling in
Mm-hmm.
stories and information for everybody to grab at.
And Gabe Akagawa actually, I
Yes,
feel like was one
good
of
example.
the well, he's probably so like in the forefront of your mind that you
Yeah,
take it for granted, but like he was one of the first like that website is such a beautiful thing where
it
I
is.
could go on and see the like tree lines. And then when I was at Sloss, I would recognize people that I had seen their photos. Like that was such a huge resource, was so amazing to me. But that was like literally the only thing online when I was in grad school. So I was in grad school and oh, you can tell I'm excited because I'm like tensing my shoulders.
Yeah.
Like I was in grad school from 2009 to the spring of 2012. And so like the internet was great, but it was
Yeah.
still like people had like Blackberries. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like the
Yeah.
first iPhone had just come out, but like the web browser situation on the iPhone, like that's what we're talking about. So like websites were still like kind of touch and go, not always, and so there just wasn't what we have now. Like you couldn't take a video with your phone and then upload it. You'd have to like take a picture and then download it from the camera, the digital camera to the computer to then upload it to Facebook. Like
Yeah.
it was a different kind of time. And so to be able to like see some sort of evidence on the World Wide Web of our community was like I just thought it was amazing, that
Yeah.
project.
I love the Foundry Tree, and I love that I've, been able to see my own growth
Yeah.
through it. And I don't know if you've experienced that too, but like since I did it the first time, I've like jumped it through a couple different institutions and learned from more people. And so my own presence in the tree has changed. And I remember the first time I got my photo taken for it was at that first national conference I went to when I was in undergrad. So I guess that must have been 2017, right?
Mm-hmm. It was like upstairs, right? We had to go in. I don't know all the names of the rooms, but it was like the engine blowing room or like, so they used to have exhibitions in there because they would have the exhibitions in there before the new building was built.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember like going up the stairs with my leathers because that was the first conference that I was photographed with my leathers. And that was always kind of like a goal of mine, was to actually get on the tree under my professor, because
awesome.
I wanted to be linked. Like if you go to Jim Bonacorsi and then you go to the so you can see all of his students, I wanted to be listed under him like so bad for years. And it just never happened that Gabe was documenting at a pour that I was at until that one. And I just remember like walking up those stairs with like my leathers and my hard hat and feeling like I made it. I don't know. It was such a significant thing to me to get my picture on there. But then you're right. I did get photographed by him again at the all-female pour in the fall of 2019 in Peoria. And
was he there? Because wait, no, I was there.
You were there. Yeah.
I didn't know. Oh no, I do remember he was photographing. It was in the building.
In the inside, yeah.
And I don't know why I didn't get my photo taken. I think I was running around.
I think so. I think that he just caught, because I wasn't going to get my photo taken again because I was like, no, I already checked that box.
You're like, I'm good.
Well, I don't know. I didn't want to be like hogging the spot. Like, I don't know. For some reason, I just didn't think that was something that he did, was like, I didn't understand, but I think I do now. He takes them.
It shows like a person's evolution as well as the tree. It's like it's a dual thing in my mind, at least. I don't know what intention is.
So he's one of the people that I'm talking to right now to try and get him on so I can ask him that question. But I understood the perspective that you have after he took that picture. So the first picture was taken in, what did we say, 2017?
Yeah.
And then I had a couple other instances where he was like, because I was documenting him at the Western in Granite City in, I don't know when it was, like fall of 2018 or something. I was documenting him documenting people so that I could get documentation of him and his project and talk about it on my YouTube channel. And he was like, yeah, go get your leathers. I'll get a newer picture of you. And I was like, no. But I think that it was like at the all-female pour, somebody else wasn't gonna go unless I went with them or something. Like I was like, come on, I'll show you where it is. Like we'll go really
Oh,
quick.
okay.
And
Gotcha.
so we went over to where he was photographing with the backdrop, and he was like, just stand right there. And then when you go to my little page or whatever, you can see that it's 2017 and then the 2019.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. Like
Yeah.
I'm a completely different person. If you look
Yeah.
at the 2017 picture, I have a certain demeanor.
Yeah.
And then 2019, I'm more like, I don't know. I see it.
No, there's a difference. And I don't know when my second one was taken. I know I have two. Um, and I wanted the second one because the first one I wasn't smiling and I look very angry. So at 2017 I was there with Gabe as his TA, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And I was wearing, still had like school gear. I hadn't bought my own gear at that point.
Yep.
And Gabe was like, okay, I'm going to take your photo. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, don't smile. And I'm like, okay. And so then I didn't smile. And he's like, afterwards, he's like, why aren't you smiling? And I was like, you told me not to smile. And he's like, usually most people smile when you tell them not to smile, because he was just
Oh,
like joking around with me. And I didn't understand that because I was literally TAing for him. And so I was just
yeah.
doing every single thing he
Yeah.
said. So if Gabe tells me not to smile, I'm not going to smile.
Yeah. I think in my first one, I'd have to look at it. I think I gave the driver's license smile.
Oh, the like
You,
half.
the like, you don't show your teeth
Oh.
but you just kind of, I don't know. And then in the second one, I'm like, I don't know, for some reason, I feel like I look like a chicken.
Oh, I was much more confident in my second one. Yeah, and I was actually smiling, which was good.
I'm really excited. I have to email him back, but we're in the middle of, well, so we're both going to be, or I don't even know. So that's the thing. So we're both going to be on a panel at the Western,
Oh,
but I
okay.
don't know if he's going to go or if he's going to be one of the people that's like zooming in. I have no idea. And really, frankly, I don't care. Like, you know what I mean? Like if somebody's zooming in on a panel, like I think that that's great if they
Yeah.
can't be there in person. I feel like really it's none of my business whether he's going or not. I'll know like on Thursday when I get there, I'll know if he's going to be there in person, but I am really excited to ask him about like what he has learned about the community as a whole,
Yeah.
because not only has he documented our professors and our like heritage, but also like you're talking about, he's documented us over years,
Yeah.
and so it's like he knows secrets from that experience that I want, that he may have not even thought about or thought to say, but it's like you get an overarching eagle eye view of what's going on in the community and the currents
Yeah.
in like kind of documentation projects like this. And so I want to know. So I'm really excited about that when it finally comes around. So
Yeah. And I think he's almost at the point, if not already at the point, where he's covered a generation of casters. So like he's covered me from being an undergrad student to being a technician and, help run a foundry in Detroit to
Mhm.
like now grad school, and then hopefully, teaching again, and then having my
Mhm.
own set
Mhm.
of
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Somebody else talked about, maybe it was Kevin Vanek talking about being on the tree. And then now he has students that have learned
Yeah.
under him and they're doing amazing things. And it's like a really cool, uh, like it's not hard evidence, but it's just really cool, tangible evidence to see
Yeah.
kind of like who's learning from who and the connections and how the information is spreading. So what were we even, let's circle back to focusing on you. And let's see. So we're still in undergrad. And so you graduated, and let's
Yes.
go from undergrad into I feel like Was it your technician job that you went to next?
Yeah, so my senior year, I was trying to figure out where to go and what to do. And I was applying to a bunch of things all over the place. Nothing had really panned out yet. And I want to say a couple weeks before I graduated, I got 2 leads, and both of them were in Detroit. So I had 2 things lined up. I had a summer job teaching at Cranbrook, which is like a grad program and an art museum in Detroit. And I also had a residency in the fall at a place called Hamtramck Disneyland. And so Hamtramck Disneyland is in this I think technically it's its own city surrounded by Detroit. But it's a art environment installation space that was taken over by a gallery. So I had those 2 things lined up, and I ended up moving to Detroit, and I jumped around and did different residencies and odd jobs for a year. So I did like 3 or 4 different residencies in the city. And then I started teaching for CCS, not in their actual space, but being sent out into the community. So I was part of like an arts partnership program. And so I got that job at CCS. And then I also got a part-time technician job at CCS.
What is CCS? Can you just tell me?
The College for Creative Studies.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're working these 2 positions at CCS.
Yeah. And I don't know. I would say I was doing that for maybe somewhere between 3 to 6 months, and a full-time position opened up at CCS as a technician for metal shop and foundry. And so I ended up getting that position, and a year out of undergrad, I was taking care of like a full foundry. And I was part of a team of a lot of people, but I was the only one who was employed by Nikki that had foundry experience. So there were teachers in and out of that space, but I was the only one who had any way or time to do the upkeep. So it was an amazing experience for me that I got to like play and take care of this foundry, and be embedded in a school that was very centered on craft. So the College for Creative Studies is very different than SAIC. My undergrad experience was extraordinarily conceptual, and there was like very like few classes and opportunities to explore technique or craft other than just asking the technicians. There wasn't like a separate course. But at CCS in Detroit, it was so embedded in the arts and crafts movement and that history, all of that happening in Detroit. So everyone there was very like fine fabricators and just amazing at what they did. And so I really delved into technique and craft while I was there. And I didn't realize how much until I came here and I sort of swung back on that pendulum. But while I was at CCS, I got to run pours for aluminum and bronze, as well as be a part of their iron pour. And I think I did one iron pour with them, and then we decided to rebuild the furnace. So I got to spearhead building a coupolette for the next pour. And that sort of got dragged out because of the pandemic. And so for a year and a half while I was working there. I was in the throes of the pandemic. So everything was moving very slow. But this team effort of building this cupolet, after a long while, it finally happened. And before I left, we were able to do a pour on this new cupolet.
That's awesome. That's a great accomplishment to have
Yeah.
been, a part of. And that was even before you went to grad school. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of iron real world experience. And so were you doing sand molds there and shell, or what's a little bit about that program?
Yeah. So the foundry setup, there is sand and there's ceramic shell. With the classes that go through there, it's a lot of continuing education classes that go through there. And then there's also some undergrad for credit courses that go through there. So I'm not sure who's doing what now, but Graham White is usually the one who's teaching the undergrads for credit at CCS. But once you've taken the Foundry class, or even if you haven't, the students get free reign of the Foundry. So someone can come in and say, "Oh, I have this project. Can I, have assistance with that?" So we had people coming in. They also did collaborative projects with grad students at CCS, but also grad students at Cranbrook. So I don't know if you're familiar with the history of Cranbrook and Julius Schmidt. So he did, I don't know how many years he was there, but Cranbrook has a history of iron because Julius was there at some point. So there are a lot of people who want to continue that tradition, but they don't have a foundry of their own. So there's this collaboration between Cranbrook and CCS.
That's very interesting,
Yeah.
because I don't know that's like one part of the story that's still gray to me, is how it, and I think that the more I build my confidence and as an interviewer and as a person that's like producing this podcast, as I get more and more comfortable, I think I'll be, I guess I should say, like, as I maybe am more brave, I'll interview more of the people that I don't know, but are kind of forefathers. But I'm really interested in that. Like, isn't there usually a name for some, like, the place of origin?
Origin story?
Well, but that, like, yeah, but it's like the place where the birthing happened. I don't know. I might have
The
to cut.
nexus point?
Is that it?
Maybe.
I
The
feel
nexus point is like the meeting point where things have converged. But I don't think that necessarily means the beginning of something.
maybe. So maybe that's not the right term, but yeah, I just am really, that's one part of the story that's really gray to me, is like, how did it start, and kind of like exactly where, but it might just be like so many things where it's like, oh, well, he was everywhere. He was, with many people,
Yeah.
showing them the ropes and trying to figure out this thing for art, for purposes of art. So
I don't know the full story of Foundry at Cranbrook, and I don't think it was like that long of a history. I think um it it was one of those things where it just fell through and got shut down, which is, I think, becoming more and more common now, sadly. But I hear rumors and stories and myths that, oh yeah, they shut down the foundry so they could have a hot tub, and then they
oh,
filled
brother.
in the hot tub and built something else on it, and there's all these like rumors that float around of what did they do with Julius's foundry.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
and so I don't know the full story on any of
Yeah.
it, but what I do have is um all of these notes that were passed down from several people in Detroit. So I do have some like original like sketches and notebooks and handouts from Julius that got handed down 3 generations. Um,
That's
and
so cool.
yeah, and
Like,
I don't know what to do with it. Half of it like isn't really legible.
yeah.
And I can't even figure out who wrote what because this is like 3 different like generations of
Yeah.
guys, but I was able to like learn from some of it. There's some good patina recipes. There's some really interesting fabrication designs of cupolas.
Yeah.
So that history is in Detroit. You just have to look for it. And I don't know why, but the iron community keeps on popping up and then getting squashed very quickly in Detroit. But that's sort of the history of Detroit is it rises up, then it gets a little, then it rises up, and then it gets a little pulled down. Because the River of Fundament happened in Detroit. And then after that, there wasn't much of a iron community that came through. And then Casey Westbrook was doing stuff there.
Yeah.
And then that ebbed and flowed. And so iron's always been in and out of Detroit, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's ever been consistent.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting part of the history. And I mean, we don't know. Like, that's the thing too. A lot of people, so like where I went to undergrad, the program is closed. Or well, like they still have sculpture, but and they still pour bronze and aluminum, I'm sure. But they just don't pour iron. And but we have to think about all of the places where the people in the generation that came out of those places that are shutting down like went forth, and iron is springing up everywhere, so it's like there's always been programs that close down, but then there'll be other ones that open up, or they'll start having iron pour over there, or we went to Carbondale for like Danny and Jam Roar from Black Dog Metal Arts went to Carbondale. Carbondale has like a huge history of being one of the main like founding areas of iron. And now it's still running. They're still going. People are still learning iron there. And then Jam and Danny moved back to Peoria, and they're doing another pour this coming November. So
Yeah.
it's like we have to also remember the places that people are going and starting up iron from where there wasn't iron before. So there's always going to be like a circle of life. Or like I liked the pendulum analogy that you had. Like it's like
It ebbs and flows. It swings back and forth.
yeah.
I think, I don't know. I don't know if you feel this way, but when I hear stories about iron, it seems like there was this big, strong, consistent space and community. And I think when we see those spaces go away, that's like definitely hard, but maybe, more consistent spaces will come out of the ebbs and flows. I don't know. I'm curious to see what it's going to be like because I mean we're facing so many challenges between COVID but also between fuel issues.
Yeah.
That it's just going to evolve into something different.
Yeah.
Because it has to.
Yeah, I'm also interested in what's going to happen, but I think that there was definitely a ramping up and then like a heyday where a lot of people in a lot of different areas kind of figured out a lot of stuff, and then they would go to conference at SLOSS and like share what they knew or go visit somebody and we're pouring in Tanny Hill, let's go down and see how they're and learn from each other. But I hope that right now it's not like, I don't think that this is the golden era. I think we're ramping up to it because of all this connectivity. And like we have ways to advertise for pours and ways to get people to travel to come to pours and to post things on social media to keep kind of like connections alive. But I think that like with the tools that we have, we are stronger than ever. It's just, we have, I mean, there's always going to be adversity, but that's what sometimes makes the most worthwhile things that much worthwhile, is because you have to fight for it or fight to preserve, because part of it is like, it's kind of like we're paying homage to, like you were talking about, this like not ancient, but like this almost deprecated way to melt iron. They're not really, they're not melting iron with blast furnaces in the industry, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, so we're still doing it, and we're still like in it. And that's interesting that we've like, I don't know, bonded to it in such a strong way, all of us. But
Yeah.
also with its like on nuances, like, oh, well, my furnace taps out this much, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, my furnace is a continuous melt. Like, it's like, oh my, there's so many different varieties. And so it's part of what makes it so beautiful, because there's always something to learn or like new to be exposed to. Like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So we're at CCS.
Yes.
And so then what happened after that?
Well, I applied to grad schools. It was starting to look like there was a light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic.
Okay.
I was vaxxed and I was looking for the next step.
Yeah.
I had been around CCS at that point for like 2.5, 3 years. And I loved CCS and I loved that job. And I still care about all of my friends and the community that I made there. But I was ready to go to grad school. I felt like I had a point where I figured out my art practice and what it looked like outside of the institution. And I wanted it to be turned on its head again. I think grad school is just paying for an existential crisis. Essentially, that's what I view it as.
That's
a
great.
Oh my gosh.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, that's how I've always put it, is you're just paying for an existential crisis. So once you feel confident in your work and you're ready to be like knocked down a peg, you go to grad school. So I've been here for a year and I've been knocked down a peg, and
as you
now,
should be, I guess.
yeah. Now that it's a 2-year program, so they spend the first year really questioning you and what you're doing. And then you reform yourself. And now I'm working towards my thesis with like a whole new approach to my work. So
amazing. Yeah.
The program is successful in that format. But yeah, so I was looking at grad schools and I applied to a few of them. And then I really wanted to come to Alfred because of Coral Lambert, which have you had the opportunity to meet her?
That's another one that when I think she was overseas this summer. And so we were going to try and do the interview, even though she was overseas, and then I have no idea, but we're trying to reschedule, but it's also like, then there was just the international and also right now the fall is iron pour season. Like who doesn't love a good October or November pour? Like that's when you do them. Like that's when you can like taste the fuel coke in the air. So like I was saying before, I just haven't had a lot of luck with scheduling interviews. And so I was really glad that yours is working out, because I needed to put something out. But so she'll be on. But I just, like I said, I just want everybody to feel like it fits with their schedule, because it's not something that I want people to rush or feel like in like pressured or nervous or anything. It's just not that I don't think that she'll be nervous. I just think that it was bad timing and we're just waiting for a good time. So, but I'm excited because I don't know her very well. And so
she's amazing.
That's what I
an amazing force to be around, and like to see her working has been incredible.
Good. Yeah. So that's what drew you to the program, as I'm sure it draws many people.
Yeah. And I mean, Coral is definitely known in the cast iron community. And Alfred University itself, has a good ranking in terms of just general sculpture. It also has a history in craft, but they are definitely pushing more of the conceptual. And I was looking for something that balances a 50-50 between craft and conceptual, because I felt like I experienced it both swings very strongly
Yeah.
between SAIC and CCS. So I am excited to be here, and I can't believe I'm more than halfway through, which is terrifying but exciting. Um, and because of Alfred University, I was able to have the opportunity and be funded to go to the international conference in Berlin. So that really, I guess, is a good segue into talking.
That's a perfect. I couldn't have planned that even. Yeah. So tell me, because I've been seeing images on, Instagram of everybody that their photo dumps or photos when people were there. But
Yeah.
yeah, just like literally tell me anything that you want to tell me.
Yeah. So, it honestly, I started preparing for this last September. Coral, uh, I think she's like an advisor on the
Mhm.
committee or
Yeah.
something, not the core committee, but something else. And she was like, "Hey, this is coming up. Do you have like a panel idea you might be
Mhm.
interested in pitching?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And so I sent out a panel pitch in September, and I heard back that I got approved. And then I started building up my panelists. And I was like, "Oh, I wonder, is this actually going to happen?" Because in my mind, I was like, September to next September, that's a whole year. And with the pandemic, I was like, who knows if this is actually going to happen? Because from my experience with the last national conference, it was really just fly by the seat of your pants with the whole COVID situation. Um, so I was like, oh, I really hope this is going to happen, but I'm curious if it actually will. Um, and then as we got closer and closer, and I started putting the panel together and I got all my panelists, I was like, oh, geez, it looks like it's going to happen. I need to figure out how I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
And so Coral and I applied for joint funding from the
Mhm.
university, and I also applied to a few other places from the university and got
Awesome.
approved for all these grants. And so it's sort of like, was this, I don't know, steady climb up the hill, even though I kept like doubting it as we went. I was like, is this really gonna happen? That'd be amazing if it did. But like, I feel like I had to like protect my heart from all the COVID
Yeah.
experiences,
I hear that. I hear it.
Um, so we finally got a month or two out and started doing Zooms with all the panelists I invited for my panel, and we bought the tickets. And it was turning into this like multi-part trip that Coral and I um went on together. So we first got into town, and we were able to have a couple like calm tourist days, which
So
was
this was in town, you mean in Berlin, Germany?
yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
So
I'm
we
with you.
got to Berlin, were able to do a few tourist days. And then we went to Brandenburg, which was where the Industrial Museum was
Okay.
for the opening performance night. So what Coral was doing as part of the conference, she had a panel as well as some pieces and some shows, and she was also doing a performance on performance night. So
Okay.
I was coming to be, her assistant and making molds and like being part of her vision for her performance.
Awesome.
What I'm sure she will talk to you more about
Okay.
when
Yeah.
you interview her. But we were in Brandenburg at the Industrial Museum, and I was helping her prep for a few days. So we ended up doing some green sand molds that included tools that we found around the museum. So we were making these impressions of like these huge wrenches and huge countersinks in the green sand.
Yeah.
So Coral made like 4, they were sort of like wreath-like objects that had impressions of different items from the museum, and also included a chain
Uh-huh.
that the museum let her have. So we had this chain inclusion in this green sand piece, and we ended up dragging this red hot iron on the chains as
Uh-huh.
part of the performance. And again, I mean, Coral will speak to her own piece.
Okay.
But I
No, but
had like,
I am recalling seeing photos now, though,
yeah,
like, well, I saw the photos, but now I understand more from hearing, because when you see a still photo, maybe there was even a video that I saw of the dragging, but I didn't know what was happening because I just was scrolling through Instagram. So, okay, so
yeah,
that puts some puzzle pieces together for me.
yeah.
Cool.
So Coral, like we were preparing for the performance, she was, telling me her ideas, and she was just like, okay, so just, follow what I do. And I was like, okay. And so it was a very, I don't know, like a natural performance of, we knew we were going to drag these hot iron pieces with the chain down the railroad tracks that the crucibles used to go down.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then I think it was Jenny from UNF who started this chant while we were dragging the chains. Because in one of the videos, I think it's from the iron casting Instagram, you
Uh-huh.
can hear the chant. And so Jenny was going like, huh, huh, huh. And it was like echoing throughout this space. There were like hundreds of people there, and most of them were up on the I don't know, catwalks basically that went around the furnaces, and I felt like it was like a gladiator pit,
Yeah.
and there was just chanting and pulling and hot iron. So it was an amazing experience to be a part of and to support Coral and her vision
Oh
for
man,
performance.
that's a great recounting of it. Thank you. I feel like I understand definitely more like what was going on from
Yeah.
the distance. So that was that early in the week of
Yeah,
the
so that was the
conference?
technically the opening night of the conference, but prior to that, there were a bunch of art openings because it was Berlin Art Week
Oh.
during that time. So
Oh.
even just the night before the performance, there was a bunch of openings that were like affiliated with the conference, but also just open for the public. So Emily Baker did a performance piece. I had a piece in a show. Also, one of my fellow grad students, Rhiannon, is a first year. She also had a piece in a show. So it was amazing to like have an experience where I got to show a piece internationally and
Yeah.
actually see it. Because I
Yeah.
think I've shown internationally once or twice, but I never seen it. I was
Yeah.
just like, here, hope it gets to you, hope it gets back to me. Uh,
Yeah.
but this was, I mean, I shipped it to them, but I brought it back in my
Mhm.
suitcase.
Mhm.
So it was amazing to have that opportunity. So yeah, we looked at the shows, we did the opening performance night, and then it was more traditional conference stuff for the
Okay.
rest of the time. There was demo days, so they decided to format it where performance night, and then I think there was one day in between, and then there was demonstration days where all the demonstrations were in one go, and then the next 2 days were panels. So on demonstration day, there was this foundry in Berlin that I don't know how they got them to host the entire day, but it was amazing. And they had a tilt furnace, they had a waste oil furnace, um, a blacksmithing demo, all sorts of amazing things.
Uh-huh.
And then the next few days were the panel days, and
Mhm.
I um was moderating my panel. I think was it the 19th? I think it was on the 19th.
Okay.
And my panel, I guess I should.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you, because when you were talking about your panel before and when you were prepping for it, I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you then what is it? What was the
Yeah.
topic?
Yeah. So the title of the panel was called Material Pairings Looking Beyond Dichotomy. And so the premise or my thought behind wanting to do that is in my own personal art practice, I use cast iron, but I also pair it with a lot of different materials. I incorporate fibers, I incorporate ceramics or 3D printing. And often when I put cast iron next to something like paper or fibers or glass or ceramics, there's this very um one-sided or limited conversation that's just like, oh, hard and soft. And then that often goes into a conversation about gender of, oh, masculine and feminine. And then the conversation just sort of dead ends or it just stops. So I wanted to create a space where we can look at those dichotomies of cast iron with other materials and what conversations could be had there beyond just, oh, hard and soft, or something that's gendered when you don't want it to be.
That's a great insight that you brought attention to. What an interesting topic. And
Yeah.
I relate to that personally because my work kind of touches upon that material and now this isn't really and now this is kind of like about my personal work a little bit, but when I got out of grad school and I wanted to make a body of work using cast iron but having the jewelry background, the thing that I don't want to say that I fell into it or slipped into it, but like I leaned on my jewelry background, so it was like cast iron in jewelry format. And so it was like cast
Oh,
iron and pearls or cast iron and diamonds or blah, blah, blah. But you're right. I felt like I was kind of pigeonholed into talking about gender
yeah.
when really I think I was more interested in the conversation about value.
Mm, interesting. Yeah.
But I can't speak very much about it because I just like came to this realization right now because I was also making bow ties,
Oh,
and so I was talking about masculinity in a certain way. It's like if you're wearing a bow tie, what kind of masculinity is that? But also if it's a cast iron bow tie, what just these.
yeah. I think there's a lot of nuances to it, which I wanted to bring attention to because yes, I think you can absolutely use cast iron to talk about gender as a concept, but I think there are also a lot of times where the audience places gender onto cast iron when it's not the artist's intention. So I wanted to dig into that more. And so my panelists were Emily Baker, Liz Enns, Kristen Tordella Williams, Christina Schaffelt, and Stephanie Latham. So it was a large group of people with all these like varying practices and experiences that all brought something different to the conversation, which is what I wanted because I didn't want like everybody to be using iron in this one way. They all had this different relationship with iron and how it was used in their practice. Um, so when we were prepping for the panel, we had two separate Zoom meetings to for me to get an idea of how they used iron in their practice, what dichotomies they were interested in, what they wanted to jump into more. And all of these really interesting points came out of those conversations. We talked about iron and nature quite a bit because that ties into a lot of the fiber practices that the panelists had. We also tied that pairing into something that was, do you think iron is of nature? Do you use it as a representation of nature in your work? Is it something that's permanent or impermanent? Is it coming from nature or returning to nature? How does that evolve over time? So all of these questions that like provide context and expand the idea of what cast iron can be in conversation with other materials. And that was like only one like small segment that we focused on. So we looked at dichotomies, but I'd also call them pairings, or what we view as inherent to cast iron. So we talked about iron paired with time. We talked about iron paired with the body, and how all of those can build their own conceptual conversation. So we started with the springboard of, has your work ever been gendered by you or by the audience? And then moved into all of these other possibilities and things that the artists have explored in their own practice. And I felt great about it. I loved having those conversations, and I think it ended up being a really good panel.
It sounds like it went really well. And
Yeah.
just talking to you, which is a little bit it's one-sided. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I'm talking to you because you came up with the concept and saw it from initial conception through to fruition, and so I feel like you have a really good perspective of how it went. And it's like, yeah, it sounds like I'm sad I missed it. And I really like that you talk about, and I will say dichotomy is such a funny word because it's like it's a hot word that like people like to use, or people think it's overused or whatever. I think everybody should use whatever word they want to say anything, but I like the also using the word pairing to talk about material pairings. I've never heard about that before, but I feel like I feel like the context of the word dichotomy, it brings to the forefront of the conversation, like the differences, the dichotomy between, like I was talking about, value in the iron is like a cheap or low material, and then you have diamonds or pearls or like whatever. So it's like the difference, the dichotomy of those materials. But it's like, boy, if you're going to talk about it as a pairing, it's less establishing like, oh, well, it's a dichotomy because they're like oil and water. It's like it kind of brings the conversation to maybe like a more I don't know how to say it.
I mean, I wanted it to become more of a conversation. That's why, the title is like looking beyond dichotomy and then leading into these material pairings, because a pairing is like a conversation and a friendship rather than these like battling.
Yeah.
Ends.
And that I feel like is a really intriguing concept that I hope we start to see more of. Maybe your panel and the people that witnessed it and the panelists will, kind of keep that more in mind. And I definitely will, even just after talking to you about it now. It's like when I write my next artist statement, I shouldn't maybe talk about dichotomy. I should talk about pairings.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dichotomy has its place, especially when you're trying to, create a stark black and white. But in my work, I'm very rarely trying to create a stark black and white. I think I try and create maybe more of a feeling, or it's definitely an open-ended conversation. I don't think I'm ever making a statement with my work, which I mean, some people do. But that's never been my work. It's always been more subtle. So those are things that I'm interested in, is those conceptual conversations that can happen with just something in proximity to the other thing and what that evokes. And I think something interesting that came out of the panel that we didn't talk about ahead of time and was just a natural conversation in the moment, is how we view iron. Like, what do we view as the inherent feeling of iron? And Christina, who's on the panel and a close friend of mine, is very invested in nature for her art practice and for her life. So she always sees iron lined up with nature, like 1-to-1. And then Emily Baker was like, oh, I don't see iron lined up with nature. That's not how I think of iron. And for me, I view iron as blood. Like, I am of it and it is of me. And I'm very, especially working with coral, more and more interested in that magical alchemical side of iron and its history. Um, and Stephanie said that she viewed it as something that's associated with grief. So we all have these like very specific emotions and responses with iron, especially since we've spent so much time with it. And I think that is, part of the pairing of how we see it and how we bring it to our art practice.
And those all sound like really insightful comments that every single panelist was making. And it sounds like there was like a wide breadth of views, but
Yeah.
that you're all still doing the same thing,
Yeah.
or like keeping in mind that idea of pairings. And yeah, that's so fantastic to hear about. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still definitely like riding off the high of it. It was,
And you
great.
should. And this may be just the beginning.
Yeah,
How does it evolve?
hopefully.
And what does it turn into? And other panels are to be done. This is
Yeah.
my first panel that I'm gonna be on for the Western, so I'm like kind of nervous, but I'm
Oh,
also not running it, so I'll just
you're gonna do great. And it's also like, this is the best practice for you, is like you've been talking and doing podcasts and interviewing, like you have the presence.
you say that. I'm gonna channel that when I'm there. I definitely will,
Yeah.
because it's different, because it's like when I do these podcasts, it's very casual, it's very conversational, it's very like I'm talking to you, and
Yeah.
so if I just, it's gonna be okay. I'm
Yeah.
nervous, but it's gonna be fun. It's like a new thing, new things can be exciting, but also like,
Yeah. I mean, this was my first time organizing one. I've
Mhm.
been on panels before and discussions before, but I'd never seen it from like conception to finish.
Yeah.
And I was talking about it, I think, with Stephanie before, and I was like, I think this is like the first really long haul organizational project that I've done, because it was like a full year of trying to make this happen and going through oh, will it happen? Will it not happen? And yeah, it was really rewarding. But it was my first time going through that.
Yeah. And probably the first of many.
Yeah.
So with that, do you want to talk about what's hot on your horizon?
Yeah. So what's hot on my horizon is my thesis show for grad school. I do not have a date, and I don't know what's going to be in it yet because I am still making work.
Well, it's like a semester and a half away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be in April.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you still have time.
Yes, that is what all of my focus is currently on. And it's exciting, but it also does take away from my time in the cast iron art community, because SLOS, the national conference, is during thesis show time. So I won't be able to participate.
Okay, that puts it, because you mentioned that you weren't going to be going this year, and
Yeah.
I was like, what?
I
But
mean, I'm so upset, but it's my thesis. What
yeah,
am
it
I gonna
is.
do?
You're right. And it's part of, like, I'm going to say this, I'm going to sound like a jerk, but it's like, it's part of growing up. And
Yeah.
that, like, not that you're not grown, you're grown, but I, now that I'm doing this podcast, I've been getting some more like opportunities have been offered to me, which is really exciting. And like people are
Yeah.
starting to reach out, and it may not even be about the podcast. It may just be because of like people that I know, but I've been invited to a couple of different pours, and it's like I've had to say no.
Yeah.
I've had to say no, I can't come. And I want to,
Yeah.
but like gosh, I wish I could go to an iron pour every single weekend. Whether
Yeah.
I'm making like and make art, iron art and all that, but it's also like with this day job I can't, And so you I think are making a really mature decision to focus on your show, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're but
Yeah.
that makes sense because I was like I decided not to ask you why earlier at the moment when you said you weren't going to go, because I was like, if she wants to be open about it and talk about it, she will.
Yeah.
I don't like to pry if I sense something. So
Yeah. I mean, if for some reason I feel completely ready and finished for my show, yeah, of course I'd go, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I all of our shows are on the weekends in April and one weekend in May. And the first weekend of our shows is when Sloss starts. So no matter what, my thesis is going to be right on the heels of that. So I don't think I'll be in the headspace for that. And I had the opportunity to go to Berlin and have the international, so I feel the love of the community, and I'm looking forward to the summer after this when I can go just start driving around and going to pours again.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like, there will be other Sloss conferences, and
Yeah.
I think you're making a wise choice, but a hard one. So
Yeah.
it deserves that acknowledged. Like that's a tough choice, but
Yeah.
so but it's still like I don't know what I'm getting tired. So I'm not making as much sense. I feel like I can see it too when I edit videos. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm gonna cut this out, but sometimes I'll be editing and I'll be like, what did I just ask? Like, so because I guess that's it. And it's not like, oh, that's it. That's all that's hot on your horizon. It's just like that's what you're focused on right now. And
Yeah,
there's
I
nothing.
know. I saw the hot on the horizon question and I was like, thesis?
That's it.
And
And that's all it has to be. Some people are like, I'm going on vacation,
yeah.
So, but so what are you working on? Let's talk about that. Like, so what are you working on now for the body of work, even if you don't know what's going to be in the show?
Yeah. So the majority of my art practice has to do with my Ashkenazi Jewish background. So I'm very focused on the American Jewish experience and looking at that through like the lens of stereotypes or monuments or food culture. So it goes from being a little humorous to a little dark or a little violent. And something that I've been working on recently is dealing with iconography and symbolism from Fiddler on the Roof. I don't know if you've seen the movie or the play, but it's like a very popular depiction of a Jewish family that goes through pogroms in Eastern Europe and is forced out of their home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm approaching it from sort of like a humorous perspective. The main character in the story, Tevye, he's a dairyman and he delivers his dairy with a horse and cart. And throughout the story, as his life falls apart, his horse becomes injured and is no longer able to pull the cart and the dairy. So he has to start pulling the cart himself. And so he's taking over the role of the horse and having to lug this wagon around. So I'm approaching it with like a human-based design rebranding approach of recreating Tevye's dairy delivery service.
Okay.
So I've created this whole new outfit for him to carry his milk more feasibly than pulling the cart. I've made a whole logo. I'm going to be casting milk cans. And so I'm creating this whole new world for Tevye that sort of creates a positive, humorous spin on all of these experiences that he's gone through. So it's sort of like a world building humor that I've found myself exploring, because I came from what I was doing pre-grad school was really heavy work. It was all based on monuments influenced by Holocaust memorials. So I was doing really heavy cast iron monument, steel fabrication work, that really like questioned the intention of monuments and did they feel genuine. And so it was very dark, and I think there's still a tinge of darkness in this new work, but I think there's more humor, there's more activeness to it that I'm excited to explore.
That sounds awesome. And I will tell you something in the after show about
Okay.
Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay.
But you explained all of that beautifully. Like if
Oh,
for somebody that, because I am familiar with the movie and we'll talk about it in the after show, but for somebody that if somebody did not know anything about that, you explained it so well that they would be able to understand then where you're going with the art and with I don't know. See, this is evidence of me getting tired. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say you explained the important parts of what you're focusing on about the story so that somebody who hadn't seen or doesn't like have a preconceived notion of what it is, they would be able to understand deeper what you're doing with your work now.
yeah.
So it's really because I was like, yes, I have seen it, but you explained exactly what was relevant to then, not all the other stuff that was going on. And because there's like it's a very complex
Oh,
whole
yes. Yeah.
story and there's so
Yeah.
much.
I've given this spiel about my work like 3 times in the past week via
Oh,
PowerPoint. So I like feel like I have it down now.
you
I've
do.
said it enough that
You
I'm like,
do.
this is the best way that I can describe what I'm doing without showing it to you.
You're on it. Yes. So, with that, do you have any advice moving forward for I should just say, do you have any advice?
Yeah. I think my advice, I mean, for anybody trying to get into the cast iron world or foundry world in general, is to just jump in. Because as I mentioned earlier in this, I definitely started off a little hesitant and I did like need that little bit of push to jump in. But once you're in, you're there. No one's trying to push you out. Once you jump in, you're in. And that's what I love about the community, that you can just say, hey, can I shadow you? Or hey, can you tell me what you're doing? And everybody's going to say yes. I don't think I've had anybody say no.
No. Well, because the thing is we need the bodies.
Yeah.
Because it's more enjoyable to do it with a big group of people, but it's also like just like you get tired. There's limitations to our physical abilities. So that's that. Yeah. I think that's a great advice. Just jump in. Well, so for the after show, is that because that's good advice. Do you want?
I mean, that's all I got. I don't know.
No, that's fine. That's all you need.
What else?
And it's great because nobody has said that yet.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I figured that would be like the obvious thing, because the thing is I'm still like, I mean, I've been in the cast iron world for a good bit, but I still have lots to learn. So I don't know if I have like the grandest advice in the world. So I went with something simple. So I'm really surprised.
Well, I think that everybody, when it comes to advice, maybe like it depends on where you are in your life, I think, as a guest on the show and like
Yeah.
what is in the forefront of your brain. So there's a lot of people that maybe would be considered like our older sisters and brothers. You know, they're not like our parents, like in that generation of our parents, but it's like our older siblings, or maybe like older, cooler cousins, you know, and they are talking about personal protection equipment and like
Oh,
watching, don't lift anything alone, like take care of your body. There's a whole lot of
gotcha.
there's a whole a lot of take care of your body because you only have one body. That's
Yes.
some of the other
Yeah.
advice, you know, has been, you know, about questioning or about different, like I'm trying to like sum up and but that was the I think that people, I have heard some advice of some people saying like, if you're I think Danny Rohr said like, be a joy to work with,
Oh,
you know, just like, what can I do to help, sort of a
yeah.
thing. And so like learning by helping, or like
Yeah.
be ready to work, but
Yeah. So
nobody
that's
is,
similar.
it is, but it's not. Just jump in. Just
Yeah.
jump in, because there really is no like negative repercussions to just like finding where the next. I mean, I don't know if anybody listens to this that is not an iron caster. So it's kind of interesting,
Oh,
because I don't know if anybody is like wanting to get into iron because they like, I kind of feel like the people that are listening to this are our family. I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like this would be something that like people would assign their students, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I could see definitely like in a beginning Foundry class saying, okay, listen to like this person's interview, or listen to like
yeah.
that. But like just how it's found organically, like I don't know if I have anybody listening that's not already casting iron that like wants to, but I guess the hope is eventually I will have
Yeah, I
people
don't
that.
know. I was when I saw that question, I was like, thinking more about my past younger self, like what that
Mhm.
advice would be, and to somebody who is, yeah, interested in the community or on the fringes of the community that wants to be involved. Because I don't know if I have advice for casters who are my elder, you know?
And we don't have to. We don't have to. I mean, like I feel the same way. I feel the same way. And it's in a way, it's like kind of a blessing that I'm hosting, because
Yeah.
I don't have to answer the question.
Hey, you should invite me on so I can interview you.
Maybe,
I would love
maybe,
to do that.
maybe I should. Maybe
Yeah.
like, so it's funny though. I might have to. So somebody else, actually, I asked if I could interview them, and they said that they don't feel comfortable for their own reasons, which are valid reasons. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because, well, we'll get to that in a second maybe, but that's one of the things that they said was, well, I would come on and maybe interview you. Like
Oh,
they were like interested in interviewing me, and I feel like it's probably a good idea for me
yeah.
to be in the hot seat, and
Yeah.
maybe then my story can be
Yeah.
captured in a way that's not like bits and pieces, the way that it kind of
Yeah.
is now.
Absolutely.
But maybe it's like in the 1 year anniversary or something, you know,
Yeah.
that might be a
Yeah.
good, but yeah. Okay. So, but I want to, cause he did ask me first. So I feel like I'll have to see,
Yeah.
because I
No
feel like
pressure. It,
you would interview me really well, I think. So
yeah, I think I'd be great.
you
So if you
would.
want me, I'm here.
I guess like, cause, well, we'll see. So we've got like 6 or 7 months to work it out, figure it out. Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking about that too much now because I'm in the hot seat, so I'm nervous. So, yeah, I think that that's like really good advice too, because I think that sometimes in your first couple of iron pours, it might not seem evident how
Yeah.
welcoming, because it's almost like I don't want to say that the community is like clicky. It's just like there's certain people that are running the show.
Yeah.
And they're focused on that. And so sometimes it's intimidating to approach them because they seem so stressed.
Yes. Yeah, they seem stressed, and also everybody's in these leathers with like
Yeah.
covered faces, and you're like, who are you?
Yeah.
So I in the beginning, yeah, things seem intimidating.
Yeah. And really standoffish. That's
Yeah.
my favorite time to meet people though, is like leathered up and like, so I just went to trails this past, when the heck was it? It doesn't even matter. But this past summer for their
Okay.
like last iron pour fire at night.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I met a ton of people on the pour floor, and it's dark. And we
Yeah.
all
Oh
have our
yeah.
leathers
You
on.
can't see anything out there.
And so it wasn't until after we finished pouring and we all took our leathers off, and then I'd be like, "Oh, were you the person wearing that color hard hat? I poured on that ladle with you." Like, it's like a different way to meet and bond
Yeah.
with people that you don't get like in any other kind of situation.
Yeah.
So in the after show, maybe we'll talk about Fiddler on the Roof a little bit, just enough
Yeah.
for me to tell
That's
you my
That's
funny,
my type of after show, just
really.
Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay. I mean, but let's see. So I have some other like questions. Like just like specific, like your favorite place to pour iron, or your favorite iron pour memory, or the worst thing that's ever happened to you, or the scariest thing. Or some people don't like to talk about bad things. So like they'll tell me a funny story about their iron experience, or
Yeah, I don't want to talk about any of the bad
okay.
experiences.
Yeah.
But what I do think would be fun to talk about is Jam's all women's pour.
Yeah.
That was a wild ride, and we were both there, so I
Oh
think
my
it'd
gosh.
be fun to
Yeah,
talk
because
about.
were you in the truck with her when I arrived and you guys were going somewhere?
I don't know. All I know is that
That's
it was like the calmest, most wonderful chaos I've been a
yeah.
part of.
Yeah.
And because we were so behind, but
Okay,
it was like
don't spoiler alert. But I think that's Jam.
yeah.
That's Jam.
Yeah,
That's
her like
like,
energy like
yeah.
leveled everything.
Yeah, that's her. It's just like, she's like, it's gonna happen. I know it's gonna happen. All right, so we'll talk
Yeah.
about those two things. So we'll say goodbye to the public audience. So for everybody that's listening publicly, I'm gonna thank Gabby very much for being on the show today. It was wonderful to get a chance to interview you.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm really excited to go on over to the after show and keep on our conversation. But everybody who is listening or watching, thank you so much for tuning in today. And we'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Gabby is an energetic breath of fresh air and has dedication to her work that is inspirational. The insight that she has into the cast iron process is remarkable for someone her age, and I think that it's obvious she will continue to be an important and motivated pillar in our community. Gabby, I've always enjoyed working with you, and after this conversation, I feel like our friendship is stronger than ever. You are doing amazing things in the community and with your artwork. Your insight into the nuance of material pairings with cast iron shines an important spotlight on this concept and its meanings as these themes run through our contemporary cast iron art movement. Thank you again for this interview, and good luck with everything as you complete your MFA at Alfred. I can't wait to see how it all comes together. If you're interested in seeing Gabby's portfolio, you can visit her website at GabrielleEgnater.com, and that's spelled GabrielleEgnater. So yeah, there's two E's right in a row. Gabrielle ends with an E, and then her last name begins with an E. So just make sure you have the right amount of E's in there. But if you want to see what she's up to on Instagram, then follow her handle, which is Gabby Finn, and that's GABBIFINN. There's no E's in that, so you don't have to worry about it. And one last word of thanks to our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts. And go to their events page, see what they're up to. Also, check out what's happening at the National Conference for Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices, and apply to a call so that your genius can be showcased. The conference will be this upcoming April 5th through the 9th, and I can't wait to see you there. So thank you again and always to Sloss Metal Arts for supporting this podcast, but also thank you to our other supporters on Patreon. The funds that you support me with directly through that portal are invaluable to helping me continue to produce these episodes. So if you too would like access to the after shows for as little as $1 a month, go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/podcastiron. And there you can choose a contribution level that fits within your budget. But supporters at any level get access to the after show from each episode. And by now you already know that it's just an extra 15 to 20 minutes with the show's guest where we can decompress a little bit, talk a little more candidly, and share at least one more story. If you don't have it in your budget to support the Podcast Iron on Patreon, that's okay. Instead, please share this podcast with someone that you think would be interested in listening or watching, and I'll appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps, and so for that I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And one more thing I want to mention is, folks, it's fall iron pour season. Go out and get to a pour. There are events happening all over, and personally, I'll be attending an iron pour hosted by Southern Illinois University Carbondale on November 5th. As well as one hosted by Black Dog Metal Arts in Peoria, Illinois, and that's going to be on November 19th. So you can get more information about either of these events through their Instagram handles, which SIU Sculpture is for the Carbondale Iron Pour, and Black Dog Metal Arts on Instagram is where you can learn more information about the pour in Peoria, Illinois. And honestly, Facebook and Instagram are alight with announcements of upcoming pours. So, like I already said, find one in your area and go. You won't regret it. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.